everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Future Tech podcast series. It's me, Charlie Sell, the Group MD of Arrows Group, where I'm interviewing thought leaders, senior level people within the technical world, asking them a bit about their story, their thoughts on technology relevant to the work that they live and they do, and that all important career advice for many of our STEM graduates. So I'm really pleased to have Peter Hughes with me today. Peter is the head of cloud at Push Technologies. Push is an intelligent event data platform, clients in both the UK and the US, but also globally. And they're doing some pretty impressive cutting edge stuff when looking at how to actually maximize all the data that they use and the work they do. So really, really interested to hear about Peter's story, but also a bit about the work that Push are currently doing. So Peter, welcome to the show.
Hi Charlie, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and great to have you on. And we were just catching up a little bit before, talking about how we're in the right world at the moment, aren't we? Technology and especially clouds, with how quickly the world has moved in the past 12 months and beyond. I imagine there's a lot going on for you right now.
Absolutely, yeah. So thanks for the introduction. I guess, we're with Push. We're kind of in the business of providing software tools to help other companies build kind of the next generation of real-time event-driven applications, which obviously in this kind of day and age where there's a new, market emerging around consumer applications every month, it seems, there's a lot of need for, rock solid technical foundations to help, let other companies build new and exciting applications.
Great. And so, well, tell us a bit about how you got into technology then and eventually ended up being a head of cloud for Push.
Sure. So I guess I've always been interested in technology. Way back as a teenager, playing around with Adobe Flash, which is now defunct. But that was kind of my first introduction to programming and sort of the creative opportunities that kind of technology enabled. So I started off as a web developer. I had obviously been playing around as a teenager and managed to turn that into a full-time job at a local web agency. Spent a couple of years there before moving on to Push. So I started as a JavaScript developer, and then over the years, moved from JavaScript to Java, spent a bit of time working as a kind of field engineer, so working with prospective customers and building more like demos and kind of proof of concepts to help prove our value to them. And then for the past couple of years, I've been the head of cloud here, so kind of acting more as a product manager, kind of bridging the technology, but also the sales and marketing and business parts of the company.
Great. And so that's really interesting, the fact that, and this is a nice success story, I think, how it is actually proven that you can also progress through the ranks of a business. I think a lot of what we talk about in today's world with Gen Z, and there's a lot of perception that people need to move on every couple of years to really to advance their career. But when I meet people like yourself, and there's a lot of people in the same boat, that if you join the right company and you are continually learning, in fact, your career goes even quicker if you're in a progressive business. And is that what you found with Push?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a lot of, headlines are often around the kind of big tech companies, and, there's a lot of blog posts out there about people that join, stay for a year or two, and then move on to do something else. And that's certainly valid. But I found, with Push, it's been an exceptional environment for me to grow through the ranks as the business is growing, because there's always been something new that the company has needed that I've been able to step up into. And I imagine the same is probably true of quite a lot of smaller companies that are in a similar stage of growth.
Yeah. And so did you always plan to go into cloud, or as you from being a web developer, or has this sort of developed over time as a blend of company needs and also your involvement in what you've seen the future of technology?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to say it's been a completely planned out career trajectory, but largely it's just been based around, I think, the growing or the available opportunities. And certainly in that respect, as Push, which started as a very traditional sort of enterprise tech company selling kind of software licenses for customers to deploy themselves, and moving into the cloud space due to the clear kind of, I guess, opportunities there to grow even faster. That's obviously entailed a need for people to take ownership roles around cloud within the company.
And that's also a really interesting point, isn't it? How cloud has sort of evolved businesses. And again, I remember, I've been in the industry 18 years now, and when I first entered, infrastructure and cloud was untrusted, and very little people, thought it would ever become, until sort of Amazon, I guess, really took on a large portion of the market share. Cloud over the last 5 years, in my opinion, has really grown. How have you seen
Absolutely.
that develop?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I mean, we're having conversations now where customers are practically begging us to run more parts of their infrastructure in the cloud. Essentially, I think there's, like you say, that kind of trust barrier has been broken. AWS and obviously now Microsoft Azure and Google Cloud Platform have all, I think, proven the commodification of cloud infrastructure. And it's now a case of companies realizing that basically they can get exactly the same, technologies as they've had, except now they have to pay less for operations and maintenance. It generally is slightly more secure. It runs better. It just generally takes away a whole lot of nightmares for them.
Yeah. And again, as I said, I've seen it as a trend over the last 5 years, and it's great to see that the trust is building there. And I guess it also probably relates to the improvement in cybersecurity, as you mentioned yourself as well. Is that a part that you guys look at as well when thinking about the platform and what you're offering clients? Is also the security of the infrastructure in the cloud?
Absolutely. I think this has actually been a very critical part of conversations that we've had with customers, especially recently. We've had several companies choose to adopt our platform specifically because of security functionality. I think this is one of the challenges that's still, I think, not entirely solved in cloud, but I'd say it's certainly becoming something that companies are more aware of, which is, as you have more and more business critical components of a company's technology architecture running in the cloud, you really need to start thinking about precisely how the the various components are talking to each other and the security around that communication.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, I think it's just fascinating because it's a huge area. And so, moving on to thinking about emerging technology, then, and what excites yourself personally about the business, where do you see the next 5 years? What are the opportunities or the risks to the advancement of your business?
Sure. So I mean, one of the things that we as a company are really excited about is the kind of rise of event-driven architectures, which is kind of a term that is being thrown around a lot. You might have heard it if you've looked at, say, Kafka recently, which is another major, growing tool. In essence, I think event-driven architectures is a slightly different way of thinking about how data and information flows around systems, and really kind of building up technology stacks from the ground up to account for the fact that things are changing all the time, and you want things to be able to react immediately around that. So I think in the past, that kind of architecture has typically been a little more technically challenging to do well. If the sort of, I guess, traditional web application is, a database in the front end, which is very kind of static, but it's conceptually simple and it's very easy to get that up and running. So I think with tools like Kafka and obviously what we're building at Push, we're trying to make kind of a slightly more intelligent, slightly more real-time architecture become as easy to build as more traditional approaches. And I think kind of in parallel with that, there's a similar shift in terms of like the front end. So you have front end technologies like React, which has proven to be amazingly popular. And I think that's kind of revolutionized a lot of sort of development trends by essentially introducing the same concept of making your front end applications be able to react to data in a very intuitive way. It's made building responsive applications much easier. So I guess the overall kind of trend I see is both back end, on the server side, and also front end on the web or mobile apps. It's all about becoming more responsive, more reactive, being able to do more, I guess, interesting things with changing data.
Yeah, and thank you. You've articulated that perfectly. I think sometimes it can be quite difficult to understand the opportunities, but also what we really mean when we're looking at that event-driven architecture, especially. And so, thinking about many of our listeners who will be thinking about the job market and careers, and again, one of the nice things that I think's changed over the years is when people were studying engineering at university, you got yourself pigeonholed quite early on. You're either going to be a Microsoft specialist with C++ to .NET to C# .NET or Java J2ME. Now with both the many different engineering languages, but also the worlds that you live in as well, when you're thinking about cloud, and there isn't a preconceived route. So if you were giving people advice and wanting to get into technology and find out the different types of roles there are, what piece of advice would you give our graduate listeners?
I think the number one thing would just try building something. I think, especially compared even to where I was, a decade ago, as a sort of, a teenager still kind of like emerging into the industry, the amount of blog posts, tutorial videos, just general resources online is, today is staggering. And I think, as I was saying, the tool sets that are now available, React, GraphQL, there's any number of completely free hosted, services that will let you build an application really quickly. And I think just by taking, a bit of time to dig into that and just try it out is often, at least for me personally, I think the easiest way to really get a feel for what, building, software actually entails. And I guess getting a feel for what parts of that are interesting to you and what parts aren't.
Yeah, and I can agree with you more, building something, giving something a go, showing, I guess when we put it into the eyes of the employer, showing a future employer that you actually have a passion for the subject as much as wanting to make a career from it. So you mentioned at the beginning, you're lucky, fortunate enough to turn a hobby into a paid job, which is what it should be in the most worlds. But again, there's also many people who may have not studied software engineering and they've come from a STEM background, chemistry or another science or maths. But a lot of those skills are transferable, aren't they, into then understanding technology and engineering. Have you seen that in your own experience when either building your teams or looking at the profiles of people who've joined Push?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had a number of employees in Push who have come from less traditional or at least not purely computer science backgrounds. I mean, I myself didn't actually go to university. I just went straight into the workforce and learned on the job. So not that I would recommend that necessarily. I think I got quite lucky. But we've certainly had people joining Push with engineering backgrounds in more traditional mechanical engineering sides who it really comes down to, can you think about abstract problems? Can you apply logical reasoning, think through the process of what it is that you're trying to achieve, given the context of the technology platforms? And I think a lot of that skill is available to learn through numerous channels, not just kind of a traditional computer science background.
Yeah, fantastic. And so now coming on to the last bit, and we've already talked a little bit about some advice for our listeners, and definitely try to build something and really try and understand it from giving it a go. Have you got one or two other bits of advice? Again, if you put your employer hat on and you're looking to build out your teams, what are the one or two things that'll help people stand out in your eyes?
Yeah, well, I think one of the major things, and this comes back to what we've kind of talked about with the growth of cloud, is I think today having an awareness of how networking plays into kind of software projects and architectures, that can be a really significant advantage, at least for the kind of industry that I'm in. I think, if you consider sort of, again, the traditional, I guess, computer science education used to be very much based around, data structures and algorithms, which of course are important foundational elements. But these days, if I look at what skills we really need to employ for building our kind of platform, it really comes down to the networking architecture, how we have different processes and services running in different parts of AWS, and designing the ways that they're going to talk to each other, thinking about the APIs and the communication kind of requirements there. That oftentimes is the more salient kind of skill set. And I think the same is going to be true for a lot of modern technology companies, where it's less about one single monolithic application that's being built and more about lots of separate smaller services that all need to communicate together. So networking architecture, I guess just communication architectures in general, I think is probably one of the skill sets that I'd love to see more kind of applicants have.
Yeah. And that is really, thank you for that, because that gives a really clear direction as well. And again, I couldn't agree with you more. When I look at, and obviously it's in our business to support graduates entering the job market, and from what we've discussed, the looking at trying to build something, having that awareness of networking, so understanding, as you said, it's no longer about algorithms and hardcore coding as such, but actually how does it play with each other, and how does it evolve? And I think your summary around event-driven architecture as well really is the future. And so for the listeners, it is going that extra mile and realizing that the world is moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour. So we have to stay relevant. And that isn't about being the master of everything, but having the intellect and the curious mind, would you say, to want to keep developing yourself, to evolve like you have within Push, would probably
Absolutely.
be an underlying.
Yeah, I think it's being able to glue a lot of different things together in a way that works well and reliably is actually quite a difficult task. And so I think any kind of experience around just using say a couple of different services in AWS and demonstrating how you've put that together is something that I think really is quite valuable experience.
Yeah.
I think to sort of add on to that, one other thing that I guess speaking as someone who's hiring to grow our teams, one other key aspect that we look for is not to do really with technology at all, but it's to do with kind of mindset and really the sort of customer focused, inquisitive, curious, approach to the world. I think one of the things that we as a kind of relatively small company. We're still, in growth phase. We're trying to expand our product. And that means that we need to really be thinking about everything we do in the context of how is this going to help our customers? How is this going to make things better for the people who are ultimately paying us? So again, obviously, it's not necessarily something that a new graduate is going to have a whole host of experience with, but whenever I'm hiring, I'm always going to be looking for the person that is thinking beyond just themselves and thinking about the end user of a system. What are they necessarily prioritizing in terms of, there's always going to be a whole host of interesting technical challenges to solve in any given, application or product. But sometimes, the things that really matter the most are just getting that kind of user-facing aspect tightened up a little bit more, rather than optimizing some kind of algorithm that nobody really actually is exposed to.
Yeah, and that's also, and that's a really nice place to probably conclude the podcast, because I think you've gone through the full journey there from being committed to trying something, to then understanding the networking, to actually then the soft skills, as he said, the curious mind, and it's, I think it was Amazon who, in every meeting they have, they would always have one empty chair, and that chair is the customer, because you're forever trying to have to remind yourself what does a customer actually want, and not what is the most fun thing to build or what's the most complex, but actually, does this solve the challenge for the customer?
Exactly.
And I think you can start that out at, like you said, at entry level. That curious mindset should be something you can show, even from when you're entering the world of employment, not when you've actually been in it for a number of years.
Indeed. Just, asking, who am I building this for? What problem am I trying to solve? And, that's all you really need to do. I think that's, the foundational essence of it.
Yeah. Well, Peter, thank you. That's been an absolutely informative podcast. And as I said, really nice to hear your journey and how you've actually grown with the business. And therefore, you've seen it firsthand, I guess, the advancements of not only your own career, but where the technology is going to. And then that advice from many of our listeners. So, yeah, thank you for being on the show. I hope you found it okay.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Brilliant. And to all our listeners, that is another episode of the Future Tech podcast. So the show, as you know by now, is on our landing page, arrowspodcasts.com. It's embedded across the career portals of our 17 universities and also on Spotify. So you'll be able to find us and be able to listen to the podcast as much as see the clips on LinkedIn and our webpage. So for now, another episode. Thanks to everyone for listening. And here's to the next one.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for listening to Future Tech with Charlie Sell, a podcast from Arrows Group Global. Please subscribe to this podcast so that you never miss an episode. Arrows Group is a global technology recruitment and workforce solutions provider who focus on people at the heart of all our interactions. With in-depth technology expertise and global candidate communities, we offer bespoke solutions to every client and candidate. To find out more, visit arrowsgroup.com.